What's the those kids? What? Just like happens like that's really bad. No, let's just pretend like
This table. Closest to the podium collector. It's right in front of me.
Give a space for your giant bag.
You know I can't punch it without an Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This is our second forum that Northern Arizona Healthcare is holding to answer your questions about our proposed hospital project. This is an open forum, so we'll be taking questions from the audience, and we'll also be reviewing some questions we've received online. We are streaming this on Zoom, and we did have an opportunity for folks on Zoom to email their questions in ahead of time. My name is Andrea Kelly, and I'm Director of Communications at Northern Arizona Healthcare. And I will have our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment, but I'll talk through the format just a little bit. So first, we're going to answer many of the frequently asked questions that we've received. So some of those are questions we have received online. Others are questions we've received when we're out talking to the community, and questions we received at our previous forum as well. And then we will turn to audience Q&A, and there's a microphone here for the in-person attendees to come up and ask questions. So with that, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We will start on the far end here and work our way over here.
Hi, I'm Derek Fuqua. I'm an internal medicine physician. I'm a hospitalist at Flagstaff Medical Center and Verde Valley Medical Center. I'm also the System Chief Medical Officer for NAH, and my wife and I have both been practicing in this facility for 14 years, and we still do.
Good evening. My name is Colleen Mering. I am our Chief Legal Counsel and Interim Chief Human Resources Officer. I've been inside NIH as an employee and leader for the last 5 years and serving NIH as outside counsel for a few years prior to that.
Good evening, and thanks for showing up tonight. We really appreciate you. I'm Dave Cheney. I'm the CEO of NIH, and I've been here since June.
Thank you.
Good evening. I have Dave Beat. I'm Steve Ice, NIH's Vice President of Construction and Real Estate Development. Been with the organization for 2.5 years and have spent my entire 23-year career in the design and development of healthcare facilities around the country.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Lurano. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer for NIH, responsible for nursing across our system. I've been with the organization for 23 years, and the first 18 of those years was spent in the Flagstaff Emergency Department, then in education, and most recently in my role as of today.
All right, thank you all. So now we will kick it off with our first frequently asked question. Just making sure it changed on the screen. Why can't Northern Arizona Healthcare just renovate Flagstaff Medical Center? And we'll have Steve start with that one.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So this question's a little bit multifaceted, but the existing campus has multiple issues with it that preclude us from being able to renovate it into a facility that's going to last us for decades to come for the region. As a building itself right now, the building is about 1,600 square feet per bed. A modern healthcare facility is built around 2,400 to 2,500 square feet per bed. So the square footage of the entire building is already considerably smaller than it needs to be. And why that's important is we talk a lot about adding beds, which we do need to add beds because of our current patient deferrals. But there's a lot more to a hospital than just the beds. The support network behind the beds is about 90% of the square footage of a hospital. So for every bed, there's 90% more space to help support that bed. And that's everything from the surgery department to the emergency department, lab, pharmacy, food service, supply chain, et cetera. So if we were to try and add more beds to the existing facility, it would take our existing problems from a support perspective and only make them worse. And so some of the models that we looked at that could potentially add bed capacity to the campus don't give us the ability to do anything but add a few beds to the campus and don't do anything to increase the size of all of the support network behind those beds. So what that would really look like if we were to try and renovate on campus is that we would need to take whole parts of the hospital down at a time in order to build something that's taller and more dense. In doing that, we would lose critical services for years at a time. So imagine the campus with the emergency department closed or with parts of the building completely shut down where we actually lose bed capacity during that construction. And we would have to go around the campus systematically closing things down, knocking buildings down, and then building buildings in their place because the existing structure itself isn't sized to handle a vertical expansion. So parts of the building are 3 stories, parts of the building are 4 stories, but none of those buildings can expand vertically. So we would lose all these critical services for years, which would be a detriment to patient care for the community, and also be quite cumbersome for the operations of the hospital. We would have hundreds of construction workers showing up at a time to do some of these renovations, which would just not be supported by our current parking load. So I think we would start to inundate parking in the neighborhoods around us. So it is something that we have investigated and something that we ruled out some years back because we would never be able to really get the infrastructure and the support necessary to support the projected patient population growth in the future.
Thank you, Steve. So we can't build out and we can't build up. Another question we have received frequently is why can't, in that case then, why can't NIH just expand on the land it owns to the east of Flagstaff Medical Center? Colleen will take that one.
Thanks. So we get asked about the property, or actually not asked, there's a lot of posts though out about property, 2 pieces of property near the current campus. One that I want to address first is the North Star building. So this was formerly known as the Physicians and Surgeons Office building. That's physically attached to Flagstaff Medical Center. And some folks campaigning with the No campaign are going door to door and saying they should knock that down and build more hospital there. That's a great building to talk about for 2 reasons. One, yes, we absolutely own the land under that building, but that building is not owned by Northern Arizona Healthcare. We have a 99-year ground lease with a group of physicians and surgeons who own that building and work out of it. One of the reasons that that's a great thing to talk about when we talk about the new campus is it's an example of the kind of development we would like to do in phase 2, were phase 2 to be approved. We're only talking about phase 1, we're only talking about the hospital right now. But when we talk about how are you going to build all these other buildings and run all these other services on this massive campus, it's not necessarily us. We can own the land and enter these long 99-year ground leases with partners and limit what they do to fit with our health needs for our community. So we don't own that building. Across San Francisco, we do own a large parcel of land that goes from Forest or Cedar, I can't remember which one it's called there, is bordered by San Francisco and comes down almost to the YMCA. We actually don't own a funny little strip of land that runs almost right through the middle of it because it's a city-owned floodplain. Not only do we not own it, but we like to build our hospitals to what we call all risk ready. We want our hospital to be able to care for you no matter what is happening in the environment, in the world, in your care. And building it on a floodplain is not a smart decision when we look at a facility that will serve this community for 50 years. So there's some very structural and legal reasons we can't build there, but even if we wanted to build there, we would still end up with a campus that is then trisected, right? Because bisected by Beaver and then again bisected by San Francisco. I don't know if you wanted to talk about the inefficiencies.
The problem with that is when you're seeing patients in a facility like that, and my office as a hospitalist is way up on the west side of campus, kind of in the corner of the 3rd floor, and then I might have patients all the way over in the CV ICU who could have something go wrong, and I have to get back and forth to those places in order to make that work. I did residency at a place in Portland, Oregon, called Oregon Health and Science University. If you look it up, you'll see it has a VA hospital. It's a hospital on a hill as well. A VA hospital, a university hospital, like a 200-yard sky bridge across this beautiful canyon. And we used to lease rooms for the university over in the VA, and if we had something go wrong, we'd have to go down, go all the way across this bridge, into a different building, up to the 12th floor. When you start building hospitals with bridges that are then multiple levels, getting patients from one place to another becomes really, really difficult. Not just for the distances traveled, but also for the patients who then have to cross these areas completely exposed to everybody else walking through the hallways. One of the big problems with FMC is there's no on-stage, off-stage areas. Everything's on stage. So everybody, no matter how sick you are, has to be moved across the hospital to go to surgery, to go to imaging, to go to special procedures in front of everyone. And building on one side of the other side of San Francisco just exacerbates that problem. It's already bad, and I always feel bad for people that are being pushed down the hallway, whether I should say hi to them or not make eye contact because they're kind of exposed and probably don't want to talk to me. But it's just an awful situation, and it's something that I've seen at a much bigger hospital, and now I see it here, and I think making that worse by building in that area just makes no sense at all.
I'll just do a quick reset for those of us who have just joined us online. We're answering some of the frequently asked questions that we have received about our plans for a new hospital. We'll go through some of those first, and then we will turn to audience questions. Our next question, Dave answered it at our previous forum, which is, did NIH have a plan to renovate FMC in 2019? So even though Dave answered it, it has continued to be a point of conversation. And so we'd like to answer it again tonight. So did NIH have a plan to renovate FMC in 2019?
Thanks, Andrea. So that was one of the first questions I had when I came in June, and I was shown that plan. The plan was a visioning session, which had good people sitting around the table saying, what are the different options if we wanted to expand or renovate? And so that was one of the options inside that plan. But when it came to, when we look at the options, which is the best option, which is the most valuable option to the community, renovating was not the one that was chosen. So it was, in my mind, not a plan. It was a visioning session, but when I say plan, when I say there was not a plan, there was not architectural drawings, there wasn't a business plan around that, there were no business plans developed around that concept.
Thank you, Dave. Another frequently asked question is, what happens to Flagstaff Medical Center if Prop 480 passes? And we'll have Tiffany answer that one.
Thanks, Andrea. Our city did a beautiful job making sure that all of our I's were dotted and T's were crossed when we went through the process. Part of our development agreement with the city is that we will have a significant amount of time listening to the community on how we should utilize that campus. So written into our development agreement is us committing to using a third party that will come and help us through that journey, making sure that we hear the community's voice, making sure that we're not making these decisions in a vacuum, that everyone has an opportunity to weigh in as to what would be best for that campus. Some of the things that we've heard from the community so far are looking at medical education, so potentially looking at radiology programs, phlebotomy programs, ultrasound programs, programs that are not currently available in the community would fit nicely into that. But again, it's going to come back to the city and to our community to be able to weigh in with that third-party developer. It's called Puma. That's who did downtown Flagstaff for the citizens of Flagstaff. So that's how we'll go about that process, Andrea.
Thanks so much. And another frequently asked question, what happens if Prop 480 does not pass? And we'll have you answer that one, Dave.
So what's really clear is this community, and when I refer to community, I'm talking about all of northern Arizona, needs a new hospital that we can take out to the next 50 years. There's going to be growth in addition to all the reasons that you heard why we can't renovate the old hospital, very inefficient. So we have to have a backup plan if we don't win this election in November. So we have to look at different sites for the new hospital. There will be a new hospital. There's no doubt about that. It can't be on the hill, so keeping the hospital on the hill is not realistic. So then we have to look at all the different options, including, unfortunately, moving out of the city of Flagstaff. But we serve a greater geography called northern Arizona. We have to provide care to this entire community.
Thank you. This has come up a lot. There's a lot of conversation about who's paying for what that is not actually the hospital. I think it's pretty clear that that NIH is paying for the hospital itself, but there are lots of questions about infrastructure surrounding it. So Steve, what public facilities is NIH paying for?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So as part of our development agreement with the city of Flagstaff, NIH is responsible for both on-site and off-site infrastructure improvements. So on-site roads are the cost of NIH, on-site sewer and water upgrades, as well as water storage is the cost burden of NIH. The entire road widening off-site of Beulah from Lake Mary Road to J.W. Powell is the financial responsibility of Northern Arizona Healthcare. That work is estimated at about $45 million worth of traffic and road improvements. That will not only benefit our proposed development, but will also benefit the regional plan development that is shown in the city of Flagstaff's regional plan development for increased housing development on the south side of town. So that's something that I think is going to bring long-lasting benefit to the community. NIH is responsible for half the costs of the land and construction of a new fire station. And while I understand that there are some that think the whole burden should be us, the city has been clear on this, that fire station is something that is needed for the future of Flagstaff. And while our development might be what is the tipping point, the existing fire station on Lake Mary Road was not designed to grow, and they've always known they were going to need to find a relocation for that. So that fire station does not only serve our development, it will serve the growth along the J.W. Powell corridor and other growth shown in the regional plan in decades to come. So NIH will be making a substantial investment, both on-site and off-site, to improve the infrastructure of the city of Flagstaff.
Colleen, do you have something to add?
Yeah, a couple things. One thing about the fire station that I think is a great example of how we at NIH have tried to partner with the city actually already owns a ladder truck that we bought with tax dollars as a city a couple years ago. I can't remember when they actually took possession of it. We don't have a fire station that it fits in. So we own a ladder truck and a resource. We bought that resource as a community, and we don't currently have the infrastructure to deploy it. So we at NIH are stepping up and paying for half of that infrastructure. Now, would it go in exactly that place if we don't, if Prop 480 fails? Will Fire Station 6 move to where we think it should right now? Probably not, but also we won't be paying for half of it anymore. And the city will be left with the entire cost of that, right? We already own the ladder truck, but we don't have a place to put it. And so we're trying to partner at NIH to pay as much as we can fairly to make sure that our community gets those benefits. And because I have the mic and I'm passionate about workforce development, there's a benefit to this city that is so near and dear to my heart. I've been here for over a decade. I know in Flagstaff we say that's not very long. But we do not have enough workforce development opportunities in this town. Folks have to leave, especially in the trades. You have to go to Phoenix, you have to go to Albuquerque, you have to go to Vegas, you have to live there, you have to be trained. Then if you're lucky enough to make it back to Flagstaff, you're probably getting shipped out to those same places to do work. And this project, the construction, training, and development it's gonna create in our community is amazing. We have unions who want to set up trade schools here in Northern Arizona that will supply the workers for our hospital. And so we'll have local residents who will walk out of high school, be able to choose to walk in the door of that trade school and get educated right here in their hometown and create a skilled workforce that we don't have right now and create opportunities for our community that our community isn't gonna get in the near future. It takes a once-in-a-lifetime kind of project like this to create that. And it's so exciting to me to think about raising that standard of workforce training and development for our community, not just in healthcare, but also in construction.
Did I see any other panelists who want to weigh in? Okay, we'll move to the next question. This is one that was not asked at our previous public forum a couple of weeks ago, but it has been discussed almost daily, every day since then, online, especially on social media. We'll send this one to you, Derek. Why do we need a new hospital when the hospital beds at FMC are only 68% occupied?
Got it. So when we talk about those numbers, about the hospital being 68% occupied, we're talking about the entire facility. So beds in the hospital are licensed for different things. There are pediatric beds, there are labor and delivery beds, there are psychiatric beds, there are emergency department beds, there's inpatient beds, and there's different areas in the hospital that care for, the majority of what we care for at the hospital are sick adults. So we have our med-surg tele floors, and then we have our PCU, which is like an area between ICU and med-surg tele, and then our ICU. So peds and labor and delivery are usually not that full. In fact, sometimes peds may not have any patients, especially in the summer. So when those numbers get reported, we say, hey, we're 70% full, we're including those beds that just have no one in them. But I can't take a sick adult with pneumonia and put them in the pediatric unit. I can't put them on the labor and delivery unit. So there are only specific patients that can go to those places, and that's why those numbers look the way they do. I can tell you from experience, not just personal experience, my wife's experience, not just anecdotally, but from a numbers perspective, because we work on this all the time. I'm looking at my friend Jake, who works on this with me. We're often well above 90% full, if not 95% full, in our PCU and med-surg tele areas. And the reason that that's a big deal is because those are the parts of the hospital where people discharge from. However, if we can't move those people out fast enough, people get clogged up in the ICU, they can't get out of the ICU. If they can't get out of the ICU and PCU and med-surg tele, then they get backed up in the emergency department, and then people have these long wait times. So we need more beds in those areas, which is what we're getting in the new hospital. It's really difficult, even what we try to do with this, to get a little more technical. We've actually tried to fix the hospital in a way where I, as a hospitalist, would have one floor with all of my patients on it. So the nurses have access to me, all the techs have access to me, I have access to them, and we can all talk all day long as we take care of patients. But when you have a hospital that's running at really above 85% capacity in those certain areas, you can't place patients that way. It just is too hard because you just have to move people out of the emergency department as fast as you can to a bed on the floor, and you have to take whatever bed you can get. So it's not uncommon for me to have a day where I have patients on 7 different units of the hospital. So I can walk around all day, but for my nurses that work with me and for my care coordinators that work with me, it's really difficult because I'm not where they need me to be all the time. And so I'm running around trying to please everybody and take good care of patients and get to them as fast as I can, or discharge the people who need to go early, but maybe the people that need to discharge early are way over on the other side of the hospital, and I can't get to them in the morning because I have to see my sick patients on a different floor. The inefficiencies are massive, massive. And so when you see that statistic, 68%, 70%, that does not even begin to tell the real story of what's going on. It's just kind of an illusion. I'm going to add a little bit more to talk about the inefficiencies. So we had this forum, when we have it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and the next day I walked in the hospital and got my list of patients, and I'm going to go see all my patients. And I'm walking down the hallway in 3 South. I'm going to go see my first patient at 6 a.m. That's when I start, because in order for me to get everything done early so we can discharge people and move people through the emergency department, I start seeing people at 6 a.m., which I hate to do to patients, but that's the way it works. So I start to go see people at 6 a.m. The first room I go in, unfortunately, there are 2 people in the room. I have to walk past the first patient to get to the second patient, who is my patient. As I walk past the first patient, I see a man kind of sitting with his arms crossed, not looking very happy. He's wide awake at 6 a.m. I walk into the second room and I have a patient who's quite ill who unfortunately has soiled himself. And the room smells. There are 3 nurses in the room trying to help him. I'm coming in the room to see him as his physician, which I had to come back later, and the other man sitting in the bed next to him with a curtain between them with his arms crossed, having a miserable experience. About 2 hours later, about 2 rooms down, I go to see another patient. He is in respiratory distress. He is having a hard time breathing. He needs to be put on a machine called a BiPAP, which is a mask that pushes air in while you breathe to help you get enough air in. It's one step short of being intubated. I say, we need to put him on BiPAP, and the nurse says, we can't because he's in a room with another patient, and because of COVID rules, which we had lifted at that time, she just didn't know at that time, we can't have what's called an aerosol generating procedure, a BiPAP machine on one patient with another patient in the room because the risk is too high to the other patient. To which I said, that doesn't matter. This man can't breathe. We have to help him. So we moved the other man into the hallway. So another man in his hospital gown, who's sick, who's in the hospital, he sits in the hallway while we save the life of the other person next door or in the same room. So I could tell 1,000 stories like this. And I told everybody I wish that had happened the same day as the forum so I could have talked about it, but of course it happened the next morning, so I'm sharing it now. But to go back to the original question, I hope people understand what I'm saying about the 70% full, because that's not the real picture. It's so much more nuanced than that.
Thanks, Derek, and I think Steve had something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because it plays into the numbers, so Derek made a great point about the actual licensed beds, right? So we have beds that are licensed as behavioral, we have beds that are licensed as peds, and we can't put sick acute care adult patients in those beds. So if the pediatric department happens to be empty, those 14 beds count against us, and when you look at the numbers, the way they're being looked at, but possibly during RSV season, those beds are completely full. The other thing that number doesn't take account of is we've discussed this in the past about our double occupancy rooms. We never really get to use our double occupancy rooms as efficiently as we want to. We typically have 8 or 9 of those double occupancy rooms that we cannot, because of either same-sex or infection rule out, use as double occupancy rooms, but that other bed in the room doesn't come off the books. So it counts towards those numbers that are seemingly lower than what we're at. But in reality, we operate somewhere in the 90% occupancy range in our adult acute beds, and why that's important, and we keep saying that number is, in the planning world of healthcare, 85% is full. You can't be 100% full all the time. We have to have time to turn the rooms over, to clean them, to get patients moved around. So once a hospital, and this isn't just ours, this is really any hospital across the country, once you hit 85% occupancy, you are considered full, and everything after that starts to become an operational burden.
And I'll add to that, when I was a resident in Oregon, I think it was 2006 that OHSU opened a brand new bed tower called Kohler Pavilion. And it was beautiful. It had these windows from floor to ceiling that looked down at the river and down at the rest of the city. And those rooms were single occupancy. And when you would go into those rooms, those single occupancy rooms in new 2006 construction, maybe in 2005, were bigger than our double occupancy rooms when you take a bed out. So that's really saying how small those rooms are. And on that same day, there was a patient that had to go to dialysis that was on the far side of the room. We can't move a patient out of the far side of one of those double occupancy rooms without moving the patient close to the door. They have to be moved. Their bed has to be tilted. They have to be unhooked. You have to do all kinds of things and disturb them to move someone out. The rooms are so small. It's even the single occupancy rooms are small. People can't stay with their loved ones. It's not conducive to healing.
Andrea, I just also wanted to add, one of the misconceptions that I hear often is the numbers that we report are based on staffing. That's not true. When we report our data, it's based off of licensed beds. So it's not based off of staff beds, it's based off of how many licensed beds we have at the facility. I think that's an important point of clarification that needs to be noted.
Thank you.
Tiffany, if you could maybe elaborate on some of the things about negative pressure rooms, because I think that plays a critical part of this whole equation.
Thanks, Dave. I think during the pandemic, that was most telling for us and most challenging. At our facility, not all of our rooms were capable of caring for respiratory patients like we needed them to be. So we had to makeshift, and it was incredibly challenging on our nursing staff. The last time I had the opportunity to talk about this, we would at times literally have equipment falling from the ceiling that shouldn't have been falling from the ceiling. So one of the things that we're most excited about at our new facility is ensuring the safety of our staff and making sure that our rooms are built to the capacity that we need them to be built based on what we're seeing from a pandemic and future pandemic perspective.
And on those negative pressure rooms, I'll add, our facilities people did an amazing job being adaptable during COVID. But those rooms would have to have air scrubbers in them, ventilation that took the air outside, because we only have, I don't know how many, so I won't say, but not very many negative air pressure rooms compared to what we should have, and Steve would know more than I would on that. But when you'd go in to see those patients, I'd have an N95 mask on and goggles and a thing over my head, which doesn't make sense because I'm bald, but I still had to wear it, and a gown and gloves, and I would go in to see them. You could hear nothing because there was a constant just running in the room. So I'm yelling at people while they're trying to talk to me. They can't breathe well, right, because they're in the hospital with COVID. It's just a really bad scene. It was a terrible environment. And we had that throughout our entire hospital during that time. When we got up to, I think our max number of COVID patients was 70 at one time that we had at Flagstaff Medical Center, we probably had 60 rooms with that set up in it for those patients.
Thank you all. Our next frequently asked, actually not frequently asked question, this is another one that is frequently discussed on social media that we would like to have the opportunity to answer. Will this project mean higher healthcare costs for patients? Tiff, can you address that?
Yes, absolutely not. Healthcare costs, it's one of the areas where we're strictly regulated, so we can't just make the decision to raise our costs to whatever we think would be best for ourselves. It's something that is well regulated, and we have no intention of raising healthcare costs for the community.
Thank you. That concludes all the questions that we know we get every time we talk to people in the community. We see those every day online. So now we will open the floor to audience questions here in the room. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question?
While we're waiting for our first person to ask, I also do want to thank the City of Flagstaff put out a frequently asked questions document on Friday afternoon. It's posted on their website for the City of Flagstaff. It's also posted on Choose Flagstaff. And for those of you, I know we have more online than in the room, but for those of you in the room, we have copies in the back. The city answers some of these same questions themselves. So I know some people have felt frustrated, unsure of kind of how to know they're getting the most objective information. We do have another voice from the City of Flagstaff speaking to the conditions in the development agreement and the fact that there are no new taxes associated with this project.
Thanks, Colleen. We have a microphone in the middle of the room here for anybody to come ask questions. Okay, we have our first person approaching. I'll be brave. Be brave, thank you. And I'd like to ask if you just ask one question at a time.
Sure.
Sometimes people layer on 3 and 4 and it gets really hard. So let's just start with one. Thank you.
I have a concern that I've been here for 53 years. And this used to be a community hospital. And we knew everybody. We knew all the members of the board. And now I pulled up on the line. I didn't recognize a single person. I'm wondering who those people are that are making these kinds of decisions, because it doesn't seem like we're a community hospital anymore. Incidentally, I don't have a problem with building a new hospital. I think you've proven it, and some of us have been there before, and yeah, it's crowded and all that. We probably do need a hospital. It's just a matter of where and how those decisions are made and how they fit within the community. If we had a community board that cared about Flagstaff, maybe we wouldn't be asking all these questions. We'd say, well, let's build this hospital. Apparently there's enough money to do that.
So how is our board selected? How are the members chosen? And who are they?
Yeah.
You can see their bios online to know who they are. I think you're asking how they got there, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of, I just feel that since I don't know them, and I've lived here a long time, and I know a lot of people, and I didn't recognize a single person. So, I don't know how they're elected, I don't know how they got there. But how did they?
We'll be happy to share.
Sure.
Thank you.
We do have a board member in the room who I won't make answer, but you are welcome to join in. Oh, thank you. Alice Gannier is a longtime nurse in Flagstaff and is on our board. So Alice, I'll let you answer that question directly.
Yes, I worked,
Scooch forward a little bit so the mic, thank you.
I worked at Flagstaff Medical Center for 35 years before I retired, and I was the Senior Vice President of Patient Care Services for 24 years. I have been on the board for 10 years now. Our board is has community members. I have lived in this community for 50 years. We have a number of members who live in the Flagstaff area. We also have a number of members who live in the Verde Valley, Sedona area, because we serve that area also. So we do have community members, and as far as it not being the community hospital anymore, the whole town has grown. When I started there, I knew everyone who worked at the hospital very well. By the time I retired, we had over 3,000 employees just at the hospital. So even that, I did not know everyone except by their faces. But this town has grown. So the board, I will speak for myself, not for the entire board. The board has looked at this scenario, and we support moving forward with this. We feel that it's best for healthcare in the community and all of northern Arizona. And I will say, because I've been around healthcare and through hospitals throughout the country, it is rare that a town our size has the services that our hospital provides, because we have been able to grow and get the expertise. I will also say, when I started 50 years ago, it was a state-of-the-art hospital then. And you're talking about how small the rooms are now. When the new hospital was built in 1986, those rooms were designed to the maximum size allowed by the state at that time for the rooms. And now, with modern technology and change in healthcare, those rooms are woefully inadequate. And so I would say we need this. And back to why I came up here, I am a community member, I am a concerned community citizen, and I believe a yes vote is needed for this, for the healthcare in the future.
Thank you, Alice.
And I just want to comment on that idea about we used to be a community hospital, but now we've changed. So when I got here in 2009, my wife and I, we were seeing the transition from a sole community hospital just taking care of this immediate community to someplace that was growing and taking care of a whole region. And we talk about, I know a lot of people don't like the idea about if we build a new hospital, we'll get all these amazing physicians. I think there's a lot of truth in that. If I came to this facility now to interview, I wouldn't be interested just based on the makeup of the hospital physically. But when you become a hospital that takes care of patients from all over a large region, you're going to get all kinds of interesting cases and pathology and things that you don't necessarily get if you are just a small hospital in a small town. The town's grown a lot. We're a level 1 trauma center, the only level 1 trauma center in North Maricopa County. I think there are 13 in the state, 11 in the Phoenix area, 1 in Tucson, and 1 in Flagstaff. So being a level 1 trauma center and maintaining that certification means we have to have things like neurosurgery, cardiothoracic surgery, vascular surgery, ENT, specialties that may not be in Flagstaff if we weren't at that status. So to Alice's point, we have an amazing facility in a very small, we have amazing capabilities for the community size that we're in. But part of the reason that is because we're a level 1 trauma center and it's growing to take care of all these people from all over. So when we get applicants, and I know people say we don't, but we have a lot of applicants, we get applicants, they come here because they get to do cool stuff that they wouldn't get to do at a small hospital. So as a result, the community benefits because we have interventional cardiologists that want to take care of you. We have neurosurgeons that can take care of you. We have vascular surgeons and cardio. You can have open heart surgery. You can have a TAVR here, which I won't even explain what that is, but you can't get that in most hospitals in a town this size. So the community benefits greatly by us being not just a community hospital, but by being a community hospital with a much larger community.
And can we explain the process of how someone ends up on our board? How does that selection process function?
I can take that, and thank you, Alice. Again, Alice Ganier's been an amazing servant of this community for a long time in healthcare. And most of our board is community-based. There are, I believe we currently have 14 board members, only 2 do not reside in Northern Arizona. We have a number in Flagstaff, a number in the Verde Valley, 1 in Holbrook, and 1 in Prescott. The board selects its own successors. So one of the committees of the board's job is to be cultivating kind of the next board member. We also have community members who serve on our committees of our board, and those individuals often become board members. But our board is a community-based board. By law, it's required to be more than 50% community-based, but I believe we're at 12 of 14 live in the communities that we serve. I know there was another question. I want to encourage people to come up. We'll keep talking, but we
Yes,
want to
come
hear
on
from
up.
you.
And if there's a couple people, you feel free to form a line and just wait for the next opportunity to ask. But thank you for coming up.
Hello. Thank you for doing this, first of all, because there's been a lot of information out there and probably misinformation, and it's been really difficult to decide how to vote. One of the things I've heard from the people against this project is that the hospital is purposefully not hiring enough staff. And I was just curious if you could address the whole staffing issue, including at the new hospital. I'm guessing since it's bigger, there will be more people working there. How does the funding for that happen?
Yes. Tiff, you want to take the first start at that?
Sure. Great question. I can promise you from the deepest part of my heart, we are not hiring. We are actively hiring in all areas, not just in nursing. And we work diligently to ensure that we do hire in all areas, not just nursing. In the last year, from this date last year till today, we've been able to decrease our utilization of travelers by close to 30% because we've done such an amazing job hiring. We've also done a great job with retaining our staff. So when we think about staffing, we think about recruitment, and we also think about retaining the staff we have. So from a nursing perspective, our current retention for nursing is at 15%, which national average is 22.5%.
Your turnover is at 15%.
85%.
Sorry, what did I? What? You said retention. Oh, yeah, turnover is retention. Sorry, thanks, Colleen. So we're working diligently to keep the staff we do have. From a recruitment perspective, one of the things that I'm most excited about our new campus is what Derek kind of alluded to it. If he was new to our facility, to our organization, and he took a tour, he said it himself, he probably wouldn't want to come here. I know that when we're in our new facilities and our rooms are appropriately sized, we have private rooms, we have natural light in all of our rooms for our patients, I know we will be able to recruit even better than we have been. But this is something that we work on. Is that still working? Mm-hmm. That we work on religiously. We look at those numbers daily, and we're doing everything we can to continue to recruit staff.
To that point about looking at numbers daily, so the recruiting department reports to me, and super proud that as of this morning, we had 94.8% core staff. So just 5.2% of the staff who will care for you at our facility are travelers at this point, or our contract labor. So we are doing an amazing job of my fantastic recruitment team, and all of our leaders are doing an amazing job of hiring long-term, permanent, what we call core staff. We have been hiring, our team has been hiring averaging over 100 core staff members per month. That's a huge number. We are still digging out of a hole that was dug during COVID. We absolutely lost a lot of folks to traveling, to retiring, maybe on a different schedule than they planned. We're proud to be getting back a lot of folks who left to travel nurse or do other clinical professions in a travel fashion during COVID. But at that 100 per month, we expect that core staff number to go from 94% 94.2, I think I got that math right, up to the 97 or 98% where we like to be. So we're doing amazing work recruiting and retaining, and super proud. In terms of your question about how do we pay for more staff, so one thing, first of all, is that the new facility does not require the same percentage more staff that you might think it would based on beds. And that's because a lot of what Dr. Fuqua, I almost never call him that, but that Dr. Fuqua was explaining in terms of the inefficiencies of a physician literally running all the way kind of across campus to see different patients. Right now, from our farthest bed away from the operating room to the farthest operating room is 3/4 of a mile. So we push in linear feet, not as the crow flies. We have transporters who do nothing but walk miles and miles and miles every day, pushing patients all through the hospital. So when we build around a core and we bring people up and down, and we're much more efficient with having the right number of beds per unit. So there's nursing ratios that Tiffany works super hard to protect to make sure that our nurses don't have to care for too many patients. When you cluster those beds in meaningful numbers operationally, you can get a lot more high quality care out of the same number or fewer people. But you're absolutely right, we need more people with a new campus. We will also serve more people with a new campus, and we'll serve those people more efficiently. Our goal is to get you right level of care at the right time, and that's how we're reimbursed. So when you get stuck in our emergency department, because Derek was explaining how we get backed up, you get stuck in our emergency department, you can't get to the ICU. Now instead of getting to the ICU on time, you're there hours late. You're getting to a progressive care unit a day later than you should, and to a medical surgical unit 3 days later than you should. We got $1 amount for bringing you in the door, and we're disappointed in ourselves when we can't get you to that right level of care at the right time. And this new campus will help us do that. So we'll be able to get you out and have fewer staff touch and care for you, but we actually get the same amount of money for your care. We lose money when we keep you waiting in our emergency department, which I think is fair. We shouldn't, right? We shouldn't be paid more because we couldn't get you to the right level of care at the right time, but this campus will help us do that.
I just want to add to what Colleen said. So I think we all as human beings like to compare. So I just came from a system where I oversaw 24 hospitals, referring to Colleen's numbers of having 94-95% core staff. At that system where I came from, that would be a dream come true. Not one of those 24 hospitals could even come close to that. So the point is, across the U.S., staffing is a real issue. We are making great progress here, and this is something that we're really proud of here.
Can I just add something? When we talk about cost, we talked a lot about operational efficiencies as it pertains to the clinical side of healthcare, which is obviously our focus. But on the operational side of actually running and maintaining our building, we spend a disproportionate amount of money for utilities because it's an aged infrastructure. Our electric bills are higher than they should be. We use more power than we should. We use more gas than we should. Our repair and maintenance budget is disproportionately high to a typical building of our square footage because some parts of the building are so old, we're constantly having to repair and maintain them. So we will see operational efficiencies of operating a better, more energy efficient building.
Thank you. I know there are more questions in the room. I was going to offer to help you out and read your questions, but you'll come ask them.
Hi, Evan Thompson.
Switch
So nice to
closer
see
to
all
the
of
mic.
so nice to see all of you again. So your question's been answered. Good. So, and I heard from you that if the 480 does not pass, there's going to be another hospital irregardless. Is that correct? And someplace other than Fort Tut Hill.
Correct. Yes, if it goes down, it can't be at Fort Tut Hill if we lose in November.
Okay.
That's
All right.
correct.
Would someone address what I've heard in the wind about private housing being developed along with the new hospital?
At Fort Tut Hill?
Yeah, that area, is that going to be developed for private housing?
Steve?
Yeah, so phase one, which is what we're voting on in this current election, so Prop 480 is phase one. It's the hospital, ambulatory care center, and parking garage only. There is no housing component to what the community is voting on this election.
And I'm just going to interrupt to say, if we could take this map full screen, we have about 50 people on Zoom. I'd like them to be able to see full screen the map of what phase one is and the gray area of what phase one is not. Sorry to interrupt, Steve.
So no problem. In our phase two plans, which is something that will have to go through another city process, so same process of going through planning and zoning and city council, community outreach, et cetera. We do have a proposed 325 unit housing development. It is something that we absolutely want to provide to the community. It is also something that by code, because from a planning perspective, we are building near what is a regional activity center. That's a planning term in the city of Flagstaff's regional plan. We have to provide a certain density of housing. I believe the calculation for that number was something like 277. We think we can provide more than that, but we do want to provide housing as part of our overall plan for phase two in the future because we know the community needs more access to housing.
But I'll just reiterate, this vote is only on phase one, only the hospital, ambulatory care center, parking, and some green open space you can see on the map. So purple is the building, green is trees that will stay up, open space that will connect to the Flagstaff Urban Trail System. Other questions in the room? We have someone approaching, two people approaching. And they're being polite. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let's start to the right and we can clear up some questions. So you touched on something that's been talked about a lot, but maybe you can clarify for the community that your capacity numbers that you report, if I get this wrong, help me, because I'm not a health person. I'm just a finance person. And you report to, I believe it's the human resources every week of capacity numbers or something like that. And in your reporting in the past couple of months, you reported you only had 214 rooms, for example. Not exact, but roughly speaking. And about a year ago, you had 268 rooms. So you're reporting 100% capacity. So that goes back to your statement you made that this is not a issue with regards to staffing. It's an issue with regards to physical plant. How did the physical plant change like that, or how come the numbers change?
So when I was speaking, it's for what we provided to the Arizona Department of Health in '22, and it's a report that we submit that has all of our licensed beds. So our licensed beds don't change. So I'm not quite sure what you're referencing, but what I think is important to make sure that we have clarification on is when we talk about percent capacity, it's a math equation that is founded based on number of licensed beds, not staffed beds.
These are reports to the federal government. I don't know if it goes to the state, to the feds, or what, but those numbers that I mentioned are accurate with regards to you reporting 214 at 100%, roughly speaking, plus or minus 2 or 3. And the year before, it's 268. So I'm looking at, and so the community's a little confused because of that. So
I may be able to help a little bit. There are a number of places we report, state and federal.
Mm-hmm.
They each have different definitions of what they want, and some of them do ask for staffed beds. So I'm going to give you an example. Dr. Fuqua was mentioning sometimes we have 0 pediatric patients. We love that, right? We don't want sick kids. We don't want hurt kids. And thankfully, during the summers in particular, we might go all the way to 0. When that happens, we send our pediatric staff home. They're on call so that if a pediatric emergency comes in or a sick kiddo comes in, we can get them back. But depending on who we're reporting to, ADHS, Nissen, I'm sure there's more.
Health and Human Services.
Depending on who we're reporting to, we follow those instructions directly. So if it says current staff beds, it's a certain time of day, and if we sent all pediatric nurses home, 14 of our 268 beds are now not staffed beds. That doesn't mean we reduced our ability to care for the people who are waiting in our emergency department, because on that day, that means there were no kiddos. Because if there was a kiddo, we would have pulled them out of the ED and sent them upstairs.
But when you talk about capacity, you talk about percentage usage, you're talking about availability versus being used. That's what the human resource does. So you're talking about some percentage. You can, not just because you close down a bed because you don't have any sick kiddos. It's because you've got availability for sick kiddos, but you're not taking in all, you don't fill all the beds. You only fill 3 of the 4 that day.
So, I apologize. What I was attempting to speak to is what I heard you asking is that you feel like you were seeing different denominators.
We
The
did.
denominator,
You reported different ones to the federal government, yes.
the denominator changes if the question is staffed beds rather than physical beds. If it's physical beds, the only reason it changes is if we take a whole unit offline for safety, construction,
Okay.
redesign.
Okay, thank you. That kind of doesn't, that squares the circle for me. Thank you. Now, the 2 other questions that you can help clear up for the rest of us. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, about the quote-unquote 2019 plan. You want to call it a visionary plan. Other people don't want to call it a visionary plan. They want to call it renovations, and there's a $333 million price tag put on it by your previous predecessor who held your same position. It's been reported in the AZ Daily twice, and I believe the number is 102 pages of a visionary statement. I've seen a lot of visionary statements. I've seen a lot of strategic plans. And I've followed corporations, everything under the S&P 500 I've looked at. Maybe the best thing for you to do is release it. Why don't you release it?
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, there's a few reasons. It's a confidential board document that
You can release it.
Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
And let's just take a step back about what that vision plan is. It's a 103-page document. Out of that 103 pages, about 5 pages of it talk about our actual facilities and our plan for future growth. Inside that $330 million budget that you speak of that came out in the AZ Daily Sun, that was across our entire system and across multiple years of prospective growth, including down in the Verde Valley. And there were multiple projects that were tied to that $330 million budget that either were executed or are in the process of being executed. The new construction of a medical office building down at our Cottonwood campus, our cardiac hybrid OR that opened on Flagstaff's campus last year. So there was quite a bit that was done. There is a placeholder in that plan for renovation or expansion of FMC. And inside that plan, it states that the first thing that should be done is a Flagstaff Medical Center campus plan to dig into whether or not additional capacity can be maintained at that campus, or if we should look at other options. It says it in the document, or other options. That document was the impetus for us hiring Canon, who's a national healthcare design firm that we hired in the 2018-2019 timeframe. They did about a year's worth of work that was much more detailed, that actually put out another document that was about a 50-page document that looked at the future of Flagstaff Medical Center, including what renovation and expansion on the existing campus could look like. It's why we know we have the data to show that renovation on the existing campus is not the best path forward for a growing region. It also looked at a split flow campus where some services were left at the existing campuses and some were brought to the new campus. And then it looked at a greenfield campus. And through that exercise, it was very clear to not only the company's leadership team, but also to our board of directors, that going forward with a greenfield campus was the appropriate thing to do to continue to serve the region for decades to come. That was a decision that was made all the way back in March of 2020. Our board approved that plan in March of 2020, and that's the path we've been on for 3.5 years.
Some additional reasons that we haven't released it. It's not just us who we discuss in the strategic plan. So partnerships are a key part of how we do business, and we talk at length in the 98 pages that aren't related to master facilities about partners whom we were working with at the time, some of whom we still are working with, some of whom we changed directions, we engaged a different partner. We talk about, completely unrelated from facilities, we talk about our negotiation strategy with our payers. That's highly confidential business. I mean, I know you said you're from finance, so you understand you don't publish here's my strategy to go negotiate with.
Redact it.
With
Redact it. We don't need to hear that. We want to hear what's the difference between the argument.
So we've looked at redacting it, and quite frankly, with how the information we've tried to share has been received, I will say I think it would be received poorly. I think if we put out a redacted document, it would become, now we would be sitting here saying, well, why did you redact? I want to know exactly what these 3 words are on line 20 of page 52, and that is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is today, regardless of what we thought in 2019, today we have proven to ourselves, we think we've shared as much as we can with the community, but we have demonstrated through architectures, through architectural work, through clinicians, physicians, and nurses that we cannot provide the care that we need to provide in our current facility. We cannot renovate our current facility. We have to build new. And so the 2019 plan isn't going to help us make that decision.
I just want to ask a question, and you can tell me, nope, don't want to answer. So, you were here last time and you had some interesting financial questions, and this time you have questions about staffing and questions about the old plan. What's your concern? Like, what is it that we can answer for you that will alleviate your worries? Or what is it that you are worried about? Because you have multiple different touch points, but what's the thing that we can help you with? Like, I'm worried that the hospital is by my house, or I'm worried that the community is going to suffer because the hospital is going to be not renovated, the old hospital is going to be vacant. Like, what is it that is at the heart of this so we can help you?
Well, there's a lot of it, and the heart of it is just asking the questions of what your foundation is for the need of this hospital, okay? And one of the biggest foundations, you looked dead blank at me 3 weeks ago. No one's answered yet, okay? And that is this whole growth issue, okay? The population in this century in Flagstaff Metro has grown at a compounded rate of 1.5%. from 20 to 21. The CBO says the country's going to grow at 10% maybe. Over the same time period, you're going to say it's going to double in this area. When Flagstaff has never grown anywhere near that much relative to the rest of the country in the last 50 years. So these growth numbers you throw out, I was given something that Steve said, well, it's from Maricopa something. But it's like, you guys are investing a lot of money, and I'm looking at these numbers, and behind these numbers is this thing called a fertility rate that doesn't turn on a dime. It's been going south since 2007, when it was first going to double, and it's down to 1.78 now, okay? So that means we're going to shrink across. We're going to shrink across the country. So this is a key that he asked me, and this is a question wasn't asked last time. I give Steve a chance to answer it.
And if you'd let us, we'd love to answer it tonight. We really do have an answer for you.
Okay.
Please let us answer.
And some people weren't here last time, so I just like to make sure everyone gets the full context. Is that okay?
Absolutely, that's
Thank
okay.
you.
That's why we're here tonight. But
All
I do
right.
want to give them a chance to answer.
Sure.
I'm going to go first. I am not going to be able to say as the physician, oh, 2% this, 3% that. But like I talked about earlier about how we have become a different community than we were. So when we talk about the Flagstaff growth rate, well, we're a level 1 trauma center now with all the different specialties that I talked about earlier and all the different capabilities to take care of so many more people than we used to even when I first came here 14 years ago. So we're not just talking about what the growth rate of Flagstaff is, we're talking about the growth rate of the entire region, and even beyond that, our capabilities to accept patients that we weren't able to accept before. So when I used to walk the hallways in the winter of the hospital in 2011, and I had 12 patients, that's not a thing anymore. Now I walk the hallways of the hospital, every bed's full in the areas that I serve, med-surg, tele, progressive care unit, and ICU, and the beds are full because we take people from so many places that we just didn't used to because we couldn't care for them. So the growth rates beyond the percent of what Flagstaff Metro is growing, or even the percent of what the region's growing, our capabilities have grown, which make us a place that takes care of so many more people. And I don't know how to quantify that other than anecdotally walking through the hallways and knowing that I see more patients today than I saw in 2011, but we can do so much more, and that's part of it.
That sounds fine, but it's not what you put out there in the public for us to
And we have more to add to that.
It's going to double.
Sure. So let's say we're wrong, which we may well be wrong. Can I finish? Yeah. So our current facility doesn't have the capacity to serve our current population right now. We defer 6,000 patients a year. We have designed a new campus that right or wrong, can incrementally respond to the demands of the region moving forward. So if the population doesn't double, which you may very well be right that it's not going to double. I've seen things like that where it's going to double. I've seen numbers where it might be 1% per year, but 1% per year compounded over what we're looking at as a 50-year response to healthcare for the region is still a number that's meaningful. We're not opening the building day one with the capacity for double our population. We're actually opening up the building day one with the capacity to serve the population as we understand it now and what it will be in future years. We have multiple well thought out triggers of how the building can grow in the future, whether it be through population growth at 1% or 5% or whatever it is. We'll be able to have a facility that can respond to that. We're not just going to build beds for bed's sake. That's not a good use of our capital. To Derek's point, we are constantly evolving what we actually do as a healthcare system. We see tourism numbers potentially increasing in the future. You can look at second homeowners, not just in Flagstaff, but in the region of Northern Arizona, which are people that we have to take care of, even if it's just seasonal, that we have to continue to grow the demand of. Flagstaff itself as a city said it's 7,000 houses short. So if 7,000 houses need to be built in Flagstaff, obviously there's a thought that people are coming. I see houses getting built around the community every day. And if you look at the greater region we serve, you'll continue to see houses getting developed, whether they're primary or secondary care residences.
And if I could weigh in as well, just to share where that data point came from. You mentioned that we answered it last time, and just to make sure we're clear on it this time, the population growth estimate came from the Maricopa Association of Governments, which is the regional planning agency responsible for making population projections that all of the local governments around the northern part of the state, basically Phoenix and north, rely on to do their growth planning.
There are a few other places, especially in northern Arizona, that is an independent Arizona analysis that came up the numbers that I shared with you as far as how much population has growth in the metro area. That wasn't a forecast by them. That was what it was, a growth. I used the forecast from CBO.
Okay.
But, you know,
Well, and
I understand that you're not going to build your hospital today for double the population. And I understand the difficulties of forecasting 5 years, let alone 50. There's so many moving parts, and you have to be flexible, and you have to be ready to build and add another tower, et cetera, okay? But going back to the doctor's question, the last one I'll share today that's really a concern is that your building, if I get this number right, and this might be phase 1 and 2, I believe it is, 1.6 million square feet. And where's that coming from? It's coming off the hill. And maybe it's only 1.2 if you take out the hospitals, maybe a restaurant. You're taking out the business from the core of the city of Flagstaff. I'm really concerned when you've got the office space absorption in the last 12 months of 70,000 divided into 1.2 million or 1 million. You got 16 to 20 years. But let's just say this thing about, oh yeah, working from home continues, and people aren't coming here and adding offices. That's why there's no construction for offices in this town. And if we don't have the population growth, we're not going to have that many offices or a need for them. And I understand there's talk about, okay, let's have a homeless shelter or build something, change the hospital into some type of living situation because we have housing. But there's an awful lot, I think, that's being left behind, left off the table that we don't need to talk about tonight because you're pushing it off on the community to a certain extent. So I'm really concerned about the holding out of the center of the city, taking away from the businesses. I'm not a business owner. I'm a retired. I worked in economic development for these things called tribes. And so this is not a concern of mine per se, except for I'm a citizen here, and I'm a concern for the community.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're super excited to do, there are folks waiting, so I'll ask you to take a seat so others can ask their questions. Feel free to get back in line after others get a chance. We are super excited about the infill development opportunities up on the hill where we are right now, right? We have also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Flagstaff to do this very careful, considered redevelopment of what is currently, quote, Hospital Hill. That's, you know, Puma, who helped us build our downtown, is going to help us plan and carefully redevelop our existing campus so it is not There is no plan for it to just be generic leased office space. There is all kinds of exciting community engagement plans about how we're going to decide what goes there and when and in what order, so that we continue to grow our vibrant downtown up the hill.
Thank you. We have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted.
And if you could step all the way forward, thank you.
Closer here. The new medical school at NAU and the expansion of the College of Nursing, how do you see the new hospital playing a role in that?
Tiff? Oh,
I think Dave is probably best to answer this. He's got exciting news for us.
So I did have a conversation with the president of NAU, who, by the way, I really like. I think he's a smart, visionary type leader. And I love that he's been able to figure this thing out with the medical school. He's asked me if we would be a partner with him in terms of figuring out how to train these young residents coming out and make sure that they get placed in rural Arizona, specifically northern Arizona. So I think it's going to be a really tight relationship. They need a teaching translational type partner, and we're, his words, you're the perfect partner for that.
Okay, wonderful.
I'm really excited about that as well. And I just want people to understand, right now, when you work in the hospital as a physician, you have very cramped space in which to look at your computer, document, et cetera. And we've expanded that over the years and built a closet here into a couple computers and so on, which I'm very grateful for. I don't know that anyone understands the level when you bring in medical students, interns, and residents from multiple specialties. Our facility now is not anywhere close to being capable of that. You have to have a large facility in order to do that type of training. You have to have bigger ORs because you got more people in there to observe and learn. You have to have bigger rooms for having your team in there so you can explain things to the residents and the interns. You have to have dictation rooms and space. So that's just another factor of that. And the other thing, when you have a medical school, ideally you want the medical school next to the hospital, or at least close by, because the students, when they're in their third and fourth years, go back and forth between the medical school campus and the hospital, because you're doing a lot of clinical work at that time. When I went to U of A Tucson, the medical school's right here, right next to University Medical Center, which is now all remodeled and nicer thanks to Steve, but they're connected and you go back and forth, and we certainly don't have the capability for that now. So that's a really big thing. If we want to train people to stay in the region, that are from the region even, and want to be here, you've got to have the facility to attract them and be able to educate them.
Thank you.
thank you. Come on up and just make sure you're close to that mic. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks. I also submitted these online, so you can just ignore these questions when you get to them. And I'm also a little nervous, sorry. I read that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended denial of the zoning map amendment application, and I was wondering what reasons they gave for recommending denial.
Sure, I think Steve?
Yeah, I think there were, your statement's true. They did recommend denial. They are a recommending body, not an approving body, which is why it still moved on to City Council. I think there was quite a bit of discussion at Planning and Zoning, specifically centered around whether or not we met enough of the regional goals of the City of Flagstaff. I think Planning and Zoning purposefully, through their processes, did not participate in reviews of these drawings as we were going through our 2-year-long process. I do think it was a lot for Planning and Zoning to consume in a one-meeting process that left a lot of unanswered questions for them, which I completely understand because of how complex the process is. I do know that staff who worked hand in hand with us on an almost everyday basis, and that includes staff from not only the planning department, but also the sustainability department, and all of the support service departments of the City of Flagstaff, does support the project and did pass it forward for approval to City Council, and City Council did feel we met the needs of the community through the regional plan.
And if I can add to, there were more changes to the project after Planning and Zoning's input. There was a lot of concern around environmental impacts, which we made additional changes. So we, I can't remember what we had committed to prior to planning and zoning, but at city council, we increased our environmental commitments. For example, building to LEED Gold standards. So that was a change that I think, obviously I can't speak for planning and zoning, but I believe that they would say they would be proud of raising some of those concerns that then were discussed at city council, and we did make additional changes: electric vehicle charging stations, solar, voltaic panels on the roof of the parking garage. Those were all things that have been discussed at planning and zoning. But because of the way the city process works, we don't make those decisions then. We talk about them at planning and zoning then made a recommendation, and because we were on this track, we went straight to city council and then kind of negotiated those with them. So if you read, Mayor Daggett had a letter to the editor, an editorial, I might get it wrong, in the paper yesterday? Saturday, thank you, Andrea. Mayor Daggett identifies some of the things that she's really proud of the city actually changing through this process about our initial submitted plan. And if you go and read that Saturday by Mayor Daggett, as I sit here today, almost everything that I can recall happened after planning and zoning, and those are exactly the kinds of things that our P&Z members, or commissioners, were raising and asking about. So council really followed through on those for the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was my next question, was what, if you planned to rework your proposal based on those recommendations.
Look at that, we already did it, perfect.
And then perhaps this would be addressed in phase 2 or with the Puma group, but I was just wondering what, if you had plans to try to bring new specialized services, medical services to Flagstaff. I have a particular interest in bringing pediatric ophthalmology services to Flagstaff due to the great distances that current children with ophthalmological needs travel to Phoenix at the moment. So that would be one thing that I'd be interested in seeing come to Flagstaff.
The facility will give us the opportunity to bring in more people. It'll attract more people. We'll also have expanded things like endoscopy suites that we only have a couple of now. One of them is really only functional. It makes it very difficult to do inpatient gastroenterology cases. We're going to have, I don't know how many at the new facility, Steve, but a lot. And we're going to be able to do a lot more. So that's going to be helpful in attracting people. And in fact, some of our gastroenterologists have said, I would never come work here based on your endoscopy suites. That's a real thing, and that'll get improved. I can't speak to pediatric ophthalmology. It's a very specialized thing, and Phoenix Children's and places in the Valley really help us with all that stuff. Now, it will probably present the opportunity for partnerships with larger pediatric institutions that could perhaps bring people up to our facility, and we have a place for them to function, kind of like we do with the Children's Health Center now, although I don't think we do pediatric ophthalmology there. But the opportunity for those kinds of things is going to be much greater, especially also if we're an educational center too, right? Because those things become much bigger opportunity when you're doing education as well. So while I can't answer that specialty specifically, the opportunity will be there to do much more than we do now. Thanks for your question.
Thank you, just make sure you get close to the mic. Thanks.
That actually is a really great segue into one of my questions. It's a two-parter, sorry, I can get back in line if I need to. While I recognize, so back up a little bit. So I'm a 45-year Sedona resident with an 82-year-old dad and kids and grandkids in the area. So I am really excited about the opportunity to have this facility, this type of facility in our region. One of the questions actually, Dr. Fuqua, is with this new facility, oftentimes, and while I recognize Flagstaff is voting on the issue, how does the new facility advance services for Sedona and the Verde Valley? So will the ENT guys, will the rheumatology guys, will the urology guys, will those services be shared so that while we are uplifting the level of care in Flagstaff, will that same level of care be lifted in the Verde Valley?
Thank you. I think Dave said it earlier, what is our community? And we consider our community to be all of Northern Arizona. So it's going to uplift the entire region. we will be in a better location for one. And a lot of times the difficulty with coming from Sedona and Verde Valley, whether it be inclement weather or just the number of transport available at night when you're coming from the Verde Valley area, when we put a hospital at 17 and 40, it's so much easier for the vast majority of residents of Northern Arizona to get to. So that's number one. Also adjacent to the airport, where we don't have to fly people to the airport, put them on an ambulance, then drive them through downtown all the way up to the hill, which is always a tough thing as well and takes quite a bit of time. When we're able to get, so just past the transport issues, and we are able to do this hospital with more endoscopy suites, with more ORs, with the floors actually being used in a way that makes sense, with our ICUs on one floor and med-surg tele on another floor and pediatrics on another floor and OB where it's supposed to be, the efficiencies of the hospital become so great. Not only do patients, while they have better access to the hospital, they'll have a shorter length of stay in the hospital because the providers taking care of them are going to be able to work immensely more efficiently when they care for them. Like I talked about earlier, I come to work, I look at my list of patients, I always see the sickest people first. I don't just go see the people who need to go home first. I want to go see the people that I might have to address several times during the day. Well, if all those people are on the same floor, I can see the sick people, I can discharge all the people that need to be discharged, and then I can see the people that I know aren't going anywhere, and it does such a great thing for helping people get out of the hospital early in the day so they can go home and have that transition to care be much better. Or I can actually get people out on a day where I may not have gotten them out because I can't make my way all the way to the other side of the hospital because I have too much keeping me in one place. I can't speak enough to what the efficiencies will bring to the ability to care for people in a much faster way.
So will those specialists or subspecialty service providers go back and forth between Verde
We
and
will,
Flagstaff,
some
so
do.
you don't have to hire twice as many of the docs or what?
Right, we have several that do right now. The access will also be easier for people from Sedona and Verde Valley to get to this campus for sure. And Dr. Bernardi, who's the president of our medical group, is really doing a fantastic job right now growing our medical group. We just started a GI service that we've had GI here in Flagstaff before, but now we have an NAH GI service that's going to be able to expand and grow. Our ICU group is really growing. We're getting a lot of applicants. All these groups were really taking off, and we're really excited about it. And we are going to be able to offer more to the residents of Sedona and Cottonwood. And to that end, we're also going to keep recruiting really strongly to the Verde Valley area as well. And if not just doctors from Flagstaff going down to Verde, I'd like to see a time where some of the doctors from Verde want to come up sometimes and work in Flagstaff because they want to come work at this facility too and come across campuses. And having a nice big facility in Flagstaff, if you're a doctor that's working in a smaller hospital like Verde Valley Medical Center and you know there's a very large tertiary backstop for you to send people to, you're a little more comfortable working in that smaller hospital. So when a really, really sick patient comes in that you don't have the resources to care for there, you know there's a place you can send them easily. Now, we have that right now. We'll have it better in the future.
Thanks, Dr. Fuqua. So couple things. One, right now, if you're in Verde Valley or Sedona and you need to come up here to get a bed, with the new hospital, we're going to have more capacity. If we don't have capacity, then your other choice is either Prescott or Phoenix. So to answer your question directly, it is going to help the residents of Sedona and Verde Valley. But there's one mistruth that I want to make sure we clear up because every time I read about it, it drives me crazy. That the mistruth is if we build this hospital, we're going to decrease the level of services in Verde Valley and Sedona. And that is absolutely not true. And in fact, we just hired an executive recruiter specifically for Verde Valley and Sedona to help us recruit more physicians down there, not take away.
And if I can ask just you lean closer. Part two, for Steve, probably for Steve. There's been a lot of talk about the population and the service area, and some camps think it's 350,000-ish, and then I think NAH has a number of in the 800,000-ish is our sort of referral area. So I was hoping you could clarify why that referral area would come to NAH, like Mr. Cheney said, as opposed to going to Prescott or going to Kingman or going to another regional medical center?
Yeah, great question. And I do think that's part of the differentiation in numbers. When we look at our our service area. We look at a primary and secondary service area, and when we look at that catchment area, it is a population of almost 800,000 people right now. In that number, though, is counting population in areas like Prescott Valley, and other areas in northern Arizona that have medical facilities. And I think there's a thought that if a location or a city has a hospital, then we shouldn't be counting them in the population we serve. But the reality is we do serve patients from those populations. We serve a lot of patients from those populations. And it all really goes back to what Dr. Fuque was talking about earlier, and that's that specialty level of support that we have as a level 1 trauma center, being able to do complex neuro, complex cardiac, having oncology services, some of these things that while other cities in the region may have a hospital, it might be a community-based hospital that really is just there to stabilize patients and get them to somewhere else. And it's what leads to us having 61% of our patient population come from outside of Flagstaff proper.
I've had patients from as far away as Alamogordo, New Mexico at Flagstaff Medical Center transferred from their hospital to our hospital, not traveling. Patients from Gallup all the time, patients from Kingman, who they have a big hospital in Kingman, but they don't have the services we have. I have patients from Prescott that come here, patients from Show Low, patients from Winslow, all places that have hospitals that just can't do the things that we can do. And a lot of times for those patients, it's a lot more comfortable for them to come to Flagstaff than it is to go into the valley, just because it's an easier drive, it's easier to park, it's a more comfortable place to be. So we get a lot of patients from all over the region. I always, and not to mention all the patients I have from tribal lands, I have tons of people from in fact, the majority of my patients, when I have a list of patients, are not from Flagstaff.
Yeah, and I'll just add, what's not in that number that also creates significant volume for us is the tourism of northern Arizona. We take care of, we are the gateway to the Grand Canyon, and we take care of a lot of patients that are here visiting, and those don't count into that service area.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Thank you. I saw a few people make their way up to the front. I'm wondering if you have questions. Hi, just make sure you're close to that mic. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Stephen. I'm a 20-year resident of Flagstaff. I've been following the conversation pretty closely the past few months, and I've noticed that piggybacked on criticism of the plan and the architecture and the size of the parcel and all that is criticism of NAH as an organization and as a healthcare provider. It seems that some people find subterfuge behind any perceived discrepancy in your numbers. And it makes me feel personally that an ulterior motive of No on 480 is to actually replace NAH as our owner-operator and healthcare provider in Flagstaff. And I apologize for the cynicism in my question, but are there any financial benefits to NAH for being a nonprofit, cost-controlled monopoly healthcare provider in Flagstaff? Thank you.
So I'm going to rephrase slightly because I don't want to speak for specific words. So we are the Flagstaff Medical Center holds a couple different designations that do create advantages to our payment structures from the federal government. That was a lot of words. I'm going to back up and explain it differently. First of all, the hard truth is it is really expensive to provide the level of care we provide in a community like this. A level 1 trauma center doesn't typically exist in a community like this because the kinds of cardiothoracic surgeons, of neurosurgeons, of vascular surgeons, of all kinds of our subspecialties, they want to be able to do enough cases to keep them busy in their specialty all day, every day. And for better or worse, the reality is, thankfully, we don't need so many emergent open heart surgery cases here in Flagstaff that you can stay that busy. So they want to be in a place like Phoenix. So we have to pay a premium to get folks like that to rotate through our hospital. So cardiothoracic surgeons, as an example, we've been with CT surgery for Phoenix CT for 8 years, 10 years? 10 years or more. So we make partnerships with these groups, and they place permanent physicians up here in Flagstaff, but then they also are able to rotate their group through, so they keep their skills fresh and they're getting those high volume cases down in the valley. The government looks at that and they say, yeah, there's a lot of cost of running a facility and providing the services like you do in the community you serve. So we have increased cost on one side. We also, because we are the only level 1 trauma center, the only NICU, doesn't qualify as a NICU because of its size, but it provides NICU level care, the only pediatric intensive care unit. Because we are the only one in the community, and because we are a nonprofit, we take all comers. We take you out of our emergency department without regard to ability to pay. We take a disproportionate share of such patients. So we have more uninsured or kind of underinsured, uninsured only through access or state level Medicaid, we call access here in Arizona. So the government looks at that and they say, oh, it's costing you more to provide the service. You're getting less money per patient because you have so many uninsured patients that you're caring for. So if you are a sole community hospital or a disproportionate share hospital, you can get increased rates of reimbursement from the government. That is true. So we do get an incremental increase over what we would get if we were sharing that load with 18 other hospitals in the city of Flagstaff, the city of Phoenix. There's never going to be 19 hospitals in Flagstaff, I can assure you of that. So yeah, there's a recognition by government payers that we have to pay more and we get less, and so they increase our reimbursement a little bit. The other observation that I'll make, it's really hard to pull off what we're pulling off. There is not a desire by any other hospital to come up to Flagstaff right now, right? So this kind of idea that we'll just, well, somebody else will come do it, or somebody else will come take it over, or come compete. No one has wanted to come. This is hard, expensive work that we're doing, and we're really committed to it as a fiercely independent healthcare system that is committed to our community. There are not other hospital systems who want to invest like we've invested in this community, right, wrong, or indifferent. We are here because we are community-based, to the question earlier, not because we won a competition to have the only hospital in town.
And from a physician standpoint, the physicians are probably the people that would get hurt the most if a second hospital were to come to Flagstaff. Because right now, part of the reason we pay such a premium for some things is because we have to get it from a different town to get them to come here. So it's not a real big win situation for the physicians if we had another hospital here. And I'm not motivated by money, and I don't think a lot of my colleagues are motivated by money, but I will tell you the environment when you have a bunch of competing hospital systems, and Dave knows this better than any of us, usually that doesn't work out as well for physicians than if you have a sole community provider in a smaller town that needs your services.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Yes, thank you. Come on up. And just make sure you get real close to that mic. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions regarding impact. First of all, Fort Tuthill, you're going to be right next to Fort Tuthill. Have you assessed the impact of helicopters and ambulances on equestrian events right next door and concerts that are put on there? Are you expecting that facility move away if it's negatively impacted?
So we have assessed this with the county. We've met with the county multiple times, specifically over the last few months. We're actually in the middle of working on a memorandum of understanding with the county and specifically the Parks Department that's been led by some of the county supervisors and some of the Parks and Recreation leadership. That actually states in it that we do not anticipate them moving. We don't want them moving. We actually think they're a great partner for us when we look at the overall health and wellness village and how we want it to be community-based. We have no intention of canceling anything they're doing. We have verbiage in our MOU that spells out the coordination that we have between the two campuses, and also have talked through placement of buildings on our campus to make sure that we're not impacting what they do on a daily basis and not impacting their ability to grow their services in the future.
Okay,
and the helicopters?
Oh, yeah. So the helicopters, the reality of the helicopters is the traffic pattern of helicopters in and out of the city isn't going to change. And what I mean by that is the prevailing path that helicopters go on. There are going to be parts of the city where they don't currently get helicopters flying north to south that will be going over their homes. And there are going to be parts of the city who have it in the other direction who are going to be relieved from it. Quite a few of our helicopters right now already land at the airport, especially during summertime. So we don't anticipate there being much impact to the Fort Tuthill area from a helicopter perspective.
The second question is emergency transport times. It would seem that the location you've chosen is going to negatively impact emergency transport for most of the city. It certainly will from where I live in East Flagstaff. The other thing is you have several outpatient surgery centers clustered around the current location. When you enter those centers, you usually have to sign an emergency transport authorization in case something goes wrong to be transported to the hospital. So are you expecting that those facilities will move with you, or are we just going to absorb those emergency longer transport times?
Yeah, so from a city perspective, there will be some residents who have longer transport times from an ambulance perspective than they currently do now. There will be some who have shorter times than they do now. From a regional perspective, we actually feel we're going to see reduced times overall from an emergency perspective. I can tell you that NIH is owner of Guardian Ground and Air, so we do have some purview into that. From the ground side specifically, there are certain metrics we have to hit for call times. By the time we open, we may have to look at additional bases for Guardian to make sure we can meet those call times, just like the fire department is looking at those same things from an emergency perspective. To your question about outpatient surgery, it is not atypical for outpatient surgery centers to not be located near a hospital. We have other outpatient surgical centers that aren't located near the hospital in town. If you go outside of Flagstaff, not all of our outpatient facilities are located within the confines of being right next to a hospital. And when you look at that from an emergency services perspective, I think it's important to note that while you're being transported, you do have care from an EMT that's taking you over to the facility.
Yeah, and Steve, in the valley, and you would know this better, having done construction down there as well, there's got to be multiple surgery centers that would have a much farther distance to travel to a near acute care facility like a hospital than any place in Flagstaff would be if the hospital were at Fort Tuthill area.
Correct. It's pretty typical for outpatient services in general, not only on the surgery side, but on the imaging side and primary care outpatient and specialty care outpatient side to specifically not be centrally located. They're usually located closer to where people live, where hospitals are usually more centrally located in points. And from our perspective, knowing that we serve a region and almost 2/3 of our patients coming from outside of Flagstaff, this location is more centrally located for our region.
And I would just also say 2 of the newest outpatient surgery centers were planned and built well after the hospital had announced plans to move to a different location. So even those physicians who opened those surgery centers knew that this was coming.
All right,
and felt comfortable with it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello again. Can you speak a little more about the housing? I've confused with why a hospital would also be in the housing business. And I just want to say that if for some reason this didn't pass, wouldn't that area become housing anyway because it was zoned originally for other kind of housing? But can you tell us more about the housing? Will it be low-income housing? Will the hospital be then making money from the houses as they sell, or how is all that working?
Sure, I'll take that question. So Just a reminder, housing is part of Phase 2, not part of Phase 1 and Prop 480. So a few reasons behind the housing. Number one, the change that was made to Flagstaff's regional plan through approval by mayor and council in December of last year upgraded that area from a neighborhood activity center to a regional activity center. And inside the rules of a regional activity center, we have to provide housing at some density. So whether NIH wanted to or not, within that development, housing would have to be developed. And I caveat that like that because we do want to provide it. We don't want to be the owners of it. We don't anticipate being the owners of it. We do think that from an overall health and wellness of our entire community, that adding volume to the housing market, that our own city leaders have declared a housing emergency to, is in the best interest of our community and in the best interest of the health of our community. So our plan in Phase 2, as outlined, is a 325-unit multifamily unit, 10% low-income housing. So by code, we have to provide 277 units. We think we can get a little more dense than that. But in all transparency, we haven't really done that planning for Phase 2 because we aren't here for Phase 2 yet. But we do intend to provide that housing. It will not be owned by NIH, so the land will be owned by NIH, but we do plan on bringing in third-party residential development. We don't want to be in the housing business. We want to help provide housing to the community. And to your question about how it's existing zoned, it is, most of that land is zoned as residential. It's also zoned as estate residential, which means 1-acre parcels. And I don't necessarily think that estate residential 1-acre parcels is going to be what gets us out of our housing crisis moving forward, and we have to start looking at density.
So it sounds like you would continue to own the land under the housing, and so just the houses would be sold to people? How does that work?
Well, either sold or rented. We don't have a partner in that respect yet. But yes, it would be just like any other housing development that gets developed on property. A lot of times the company developing the housing, building the housing, managing the housing doesn't own the underlying land, and that would be the same case for us. We wouldn't be actively involved in the ownership of that housing, only the ownership of the underlying land below it.
And just to clarify, we're not talking individual houses, right?
No, this would be a multifamily housing complex.
Thank you.
Additional questions from the room? We don't have questions coming in online. Yeah. We asked people online to submit their questions ahead of time, and they may be submitting some now that we will be able to answer after the forum. But because we can't see the screen and interact with them at the same time, we were not taking live questions from online. So I could do a last call for questions in the room. I actually will put up our screen, so how to ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable coming up to the mic today, or if you're tuning in online, the email address on the bottom of this screen, if we could make the Zoom screen show this graphic full screen, questions@nahealth.com is a way you can ask questions if you don't want to ask tonight, or if you think of one later, or if you're watching online, you can send them to us that way. There's also a few other URLs on the screen for you to get more information as you digest what you've learned tonight, as you go look at your ballot and read the language and maybe have more questions. I will remind everyone that the first round of ballots were mailed last week, so if you are already a registered voter in the city of Flagstaff, you should have received your ballot by now. If you have not received it yet, you can contact the Flagstaff City Clerk to find out how to get a copy. After you vote, I think there's 19 city charter changes and this Proposition 480 question. So after you vote, you can drop that in the mailbox. You got to make sure it gets to the city clerk by November 7th. So you don't want to mail it on November 7th. You'll want to put it in the mail ideally about up to a week before. If you have to submit your ballot after that, there will be Dropbox locations where you can submit it. Those are listed on the city website. We will have them on our website as well. And we just encourage everyone to think about what they've heard at this forum and others, and vote what you think is the best decision for you. And again, ask additional questions if you have them with the addresses on our screen. And as we still don't have more questions in the room, I'm going to thank our panelists and close out our night. So thank you so much for providing additional information. Thank you to our audience for asking questions so we could all learn more. Thank you.